Okay, now what we need to work on is assembling the carriage plate. This is the plates that actually ride along our linear axes. What you notice here is we have pairs of holes in the corners. These are the holes where our guide bearings are going to be mounting. We're going to have a set of 4 guide bearings that are going downward for the y-axis. We're going to have 4 more guide bearings going up for the x-axis. So the first thing you want to do is go through and take your 1032 tap and tap all of these holes, these 4 holes in the corners. And what you want to do when you're tapping the holes is to make sure that the tap remains perpendicular to the plate. You might want to use some sort of guide to do that. If you have a nice tapping jig, you can do that quite easily. Now the other thing to notice here is on this plate there are 2 sets of holes in the center. One set of holes is where the drive nut for the y-axis is going to mount on basically the bottom side, and the drive nut for the x-axis is going to mount on the top side. Now the tricky thing with this plate is getting everything oriented the right way, so it's flipped over so everything lines up. So again, you notice that on the y-axis drive, it's actually shifted towards you a little bit. And so what you want to do is make sure that the set of holes that goes with the y-axis drive is shifted that way as opposed to shifted to the other side. And the same thing with the x-axis. When it gets assembled, the motor is towards the front. And so you want to make sure that the set of holes that you're going to be mounting the nut for the X drive is also located towards the front. So what we're going to go ahead and do is take our, so now we have the nut clamp that actually holds onto the split nut. And what you want to do is, we can get a close-up here, you want to insert this split nut into the nut clamp so that the unslotted portion is fitting right about in the middle of the nut clamp. The other thing you'll notice on the nut clamp is that one side, there's a slot in the nut clamp, and basically what we're going to do is when we mount this with the mounting screws, one of the mounting screws is actually going to clamp this thing shut and hold everything rigid. One side has just a thread all the way through, that's the solid side. The split side has a through hole up to the slot, and then the other side is threaded. So what we're going to do is first mount the y-axis nut clamp, and it is going to go on the bottom side. So basically what you want to do is have it in a position where the nut is pointing towards the center of the plate. So we've got our plate here, and it's going to sit on top here. And then you want to make sure that the side, on the side that has the split, the through hole side that's not threaded, is facing upwards towards the top of the plate. So that when we stick this screw in here and tighten it down, it both clamps the nut clamp in place, it locates it, but also it tightens the clamp to hold the split nut in place. So we're going to have, we tighten that down. The nut's held firmly, clamped in place here, and so forth. So now we've got this set up here. And what you might want to do is actually take a marker pen and mark which side is the x-axis. And this is the positive direction for the x-axis. We might write on the bottom here that this is the y-axis. And then the positive direction for the y-axis is this way, so we'll put a little arrow there on the back side. That way we'll keep everything straight.
Record.
Okay, now the other thing, you're going to want to do a similar thing with the z-axis. with the carriage plate for the Z-axis, it only actually gets one set of guide bearings that's going to go on the back side that runs in here, and then the spindle mount will be mounting to this side. Now the thing to note on this plate in terms of the orientation, you've got 4 holes in the corners here, but we only need one set of 4 bearings going down this way, so that the holes you'll want to tap on this plate, again all 1032 holes you'll be tapping, you'll be wanting to, in each pair, what you want to do is orient the plate in its final position, and you notice I've already got the nut clamp put in place, and the nut clamp is located so that the offset for the Z-axis is off towards me, and so you want to make sure that, that the nut clamp that gets mounted here is also offset in the same direction. So holding the plate in this orientation, what you want to do is thread these 4 holes here. They're the ones that are closer in pairs for the guide bearings. The other 4 holes that you'll want to tap are these 4 holes. These are the 4 holes where the spindle mount is going to mount. That also mounts with the 1032 screws. Okay, now we finally actually get to mount the guide bearings on the carriage plates. The guide bearings get mounted with a 1032 flathead screw that goes into the guide bearing. We're using flathead screws because the bevel on the flathead actually causes the bearing to be centered as we tighten down the screw. So the screw goes through the bearing, and then there's a 3/16 inch spacer that then goes on the end of the screw. And then what we want to do is just go ahead and on the x-axis, the bearings that are going down into the x-axis are on the inside pair of screw holes here and here. So for these 2 holes, we'll go ahead and thread the bearing in place. And this uses an 1/8 inch diameter Allen wrench. I'm going to go ahead and snug this down. Again, you don't have to use a huge amount of force on any of these things. Okay, now before we can actually insert, we've got our 4 bearings mounted, but before we can actually insert this on here, you'll notice that the screw heads actually stick out just a little bit too far, and they tend to rub on this surface of the slide. And so what I've gone and done is, if you can kind of zoom in on one of these screw heads, you can see what I've done is I've actually ground off a little bevel on the screw heads. There are a couple ways of doing that. One is you can go ahead and tighten everything down, and the only part that actually interferes is the very part of the screw head on one side. So you could screw all 4 screws in place, and then you can take a file and you can just file off one side of each screw head on the on opposing sides, so that those screw heads don't interfere. Another way to do it is you can take one of the screws and put it in your cordless drill, tighten it down, not so tight that you mash the threads, but tighten it down, and then what you can do is you can run your cordless drill and you can take a file and you can file down a uniform bevel on the edge, which is what I did with all of these screws. But once you've got all those screws in place and the edges filed down, you want to go ahead and insert the slide onto the y-axis and check the fit. You should, if you look down along the edge, you can see if any of your screw heads are rubbing against this surface. If they aren't, you should have a nice smooth sliding fit. What you want is these sides are actually going to flex out a little bit and pinch up against the guide bearings to give you a nice snug fit. So you shouldn't feel any play anywhere. It should be rock solid, but it shouldn't be pinching in so hard that you have to really force this thing back and forth.